Later, child presents sacred sex and divine blessing. Past life in Khajuraho. It was only when we stepped into the Khajuraho temples that Celia and I realized that I had a past life there. For as we were walking around the complex, one temple in particular began to pull at us, draw at us. And I started remembering details that I hadn't known, that no reading even gives us. Now you would be thinking that I'm going to be revealing lots of stories of great sexual rites. And yes, in that past life, I was part of one such sexual rite. It was magnificent, it was strange, it was beautiful. But by and large, the bulk of that life revealed a completely different and very beautiful dynamic. For the first thing that we, both Celia and I, saw was that I was a tiny little, let's say, a 5 or 6-year-old boy running around the place with just a kind of let's say, towel around the waist and picking up things and carrying it and helping some builders. This was probably 1,000 years ago. And I was an orphan then. And I so endeared myself that I caught the eye of a prince of that time. And he sort of took me in and made me part of one of his lesser wives' family. I remember that formal moment happening roughly at around 7 or 9, where a ceremony was done to formally acknowledge that I was a part of that dynastic family. But as I began to be involved in the crafting of the temple, because this particular family stayed very close to that, what's now called the Western group of temples, I started picking up the trade. Now, I was never a carver, nor was I, let's say, a mason. But I proved myself capable in 2 particular ways. I was good at that life, dealing with a range of different people, good at sourcing material, inspiring teams that would bring the stones in, well, a procurement manager. But what I also was good at was I was good at learning how to balance the stone. Now, many of you will know that in the Khajuraho temples, there is no cement work done. It's just stones placed and balanced and interlocked. I began to get involved with that. It was roughly at the age of 16 or 17 when I had the first of 2 marriages. Then a few years later, as our family influence grew, significant to the king. At the age of, I think, 19, I had my second marriage, so there were 2 wives. They got along fairly well together, if I remember right. Things were not always easy, even though we were semi-royalty. For example, there was a time when there was an intense drought and we, like everybody else, had to really scrimp and save and almost starve. I remember the air as being very, very, very fresh. And it was also sometimes very fresh because on the top half of the body, we rarely wore too many clothes. It was a kind of a towel or maybe in winter time a blanket. After a while, when one temple was consecrated, there was a need in that kingdom because I think one of the heirs of one of the kings did not have a child. So a beautiful sexual rite unfolded. It was done in the evening. There were flames, but it wasn't open to everybody. It was open only to a select set of royalty and guards. So there were flames and torches burning. There was incense. There was chants, very strong chants, which had been building up right through the day. Drums. Those who took part in that sexual rite, and it's very different from an orgy where everybody is just scrambling over each other. This was a sexual rite. Is that the prince and the princess were enshrined in two different opposite corners, and they were stimulated, they were awakened, they were opened up. And many of us in that circle, very trusted beings, were participating in raising the sexual energy, first in individual touches, and then the circle around us joined in a very fascinating sexual circle. Drums beating, incense, sexuality raised to the divine. And the feeling, the presence that something else was in that space was overpowering. Strange things began to happen. Lights were flickering in the sky, not just that of the flaming torches, and then accompanied by priests and priestesses. The main couple came, and as they started the process of coming together, it was a very detailed process, very slow, very gradual. Interruptions, chants, and there was a moment of bringing and coming together. And when suddenly there was at that point where they touched, not just the first level, which people call orgasm, but the second and third, there was a kind of a ripple that passed out, right out, like a huge web of light, right out, touching each one of us, making us feel that we had never ever known what sexuality was. And it spread out, as it was as if the whole land had listened to the love of the prince and the princess. Bear a child. But the temple that I personally was most fascinated by was not even the temple that I helped build, but a smaller shrine that faces it. One carved in the shape of great boar form of Lord Vishnu. And it is exquisite and brilliant and magnificent because all the many, many millions that form Lord Vishnu are depicted on his skin. And as you stand there and as chants and prayers rise around you, you can feel, you can know the real, true, magnificent vitality of the divine. Now, many will say that, like, look, why do some religions have these very strange figures of wild boars covered with humans? It is a representation, but it is a representation of the incredible power of the divine. And by depicting the Lord as a boar, we are not bringing him down. We are in our minds trying to capture the ferocity, aliveness, and richness and magnificence of his being. We do not encounter it in our daily lives at all. But those who have faced a wild boar darting through a jungle, its tusks flaring, its rage. Yes, that rage is part of the divine. Now, it's very easy today to keep talking about God as if He's a loving being. And it's true, God is loving. But it is this ferocious power that contains not just galactic power, not just power of one universe with its billions and billions of stars, but the ferocity of a being that contains trillions of universes and more. And there is a great joy in knowing that each of us is hair on His skin. The past life that I once was, for a moment I'm going to request him to come out. I'm inviting him into my being, and he's in my being. And he's looking through my eyes into yours. He's looking at you, at other sides of you, from times bygone, when life was not the strange chess game it has now become, but when it had a vitality, a richness, a power, a magnificence, a royalty, a humility too, and a generosity that we can rarely suspect. Leave this video much richer, for you once again realize that past lives are real, that in fact they can be confirmed. Also realize that sexual worship is powerful, and so powerful that it can actually unite with nature, bind with nature. Another learning is that if an orphan boy in a temple could have been hugged and looked after, it means that each of us, when we feel alone and orphaned, can seek help and can find help. And last and not least, there are gods from across the world which depict the divinity in different ways. Some of us just push them aside, but if we learn from them, we can be enriched. Thank you for subscribing to our channel, visiting creativechild.com, and growing with God.